Welcome everyone. I'm here with my good friend Geof Tio, like a friend, a mentor, a little bit of everything, who has been in chaplaincy ministry for quite some time now. I remember one of my first interactions with you, Geof, was at a pastor's meeting. It was my first year in pastoral ministry. And I was so unsure of myself. I just remember not being confident in my ministry, being a pastor. And of course, you're a young person, so you're trying to understand your own identity. And no one really teaches you these things. Like when I went to school, no one taught me, like, who are you and what is your identity and the importance of self awareness. You don't really go into any of that. It's very much theological, philosophical, which I like. But then how that applies to my day-to-day life in ministry is complicated. But you were running, Pastor Glenn introduced you during, the pastor meetings and talked about your ComCare chaplain network, which we're going to get into a little bit. But I remember he just seemed to really believe in your ministry. He just like looked at us and then looked at you and he was like, guys, this is the real deal. What he is doing, you all need to be a part of. And I was like, well, what is he doing? And then you kind of, went into your conversation. But I also remember I mentioned what you talked about in that meeting to one of my good friends, Robbie Parrish, who actually was a part of one of your programs. And he said it was pretty eye-opening for himself. So I want to kind of dive into that conversation. But before we start, do you mind just kind of sharing a little bit about yourself, who you are, but also what you are currently doing in Arizona and what you have done with your work of chaplaincy?
Sure. I'm a dad. I have three kids. We're entering this year. I think we would consider this our first year of empty nesting.
Oh, there you go.
Um, um, I've been in chaplaincy ministry since 2004, and it's not only chaplaincy ministry. I also trained chaplains and trained those who are training people to be chaplains.
Wow.
Right now, I'm in the process of relocating to California. I'm going to miss you guys, but that's kind of exciting. It's not actually a change of a career. It's more of expanding and allowing myself to be more useful in some leadership roles that three hospitals are looking for.
Okay.
So, right, yeah, that's a big transition for us. Aside from the empty nesting, it's also change of environment, change of roles a little bit, but I would still be training chaplains and still be part of the community care chaplains.
That's awesome. Now, I love that you introduce yourself first as a dad, because one thing I noticed that, especially in my life, every time I introduce myself, I always start with my job. I think a lot of what, sometimes we equate a lot of times what we do with who we are. And those two are so tied together. But now, one thing you've shared with me, you spoke for one of our assemblies here at the school,
Yeah.
and you shared about, actually, to my surprise, that you used to be a high school teacher.
Yes.
You used to teach in high school, and you used to be a pastor. So, one thing that I kind of want to understand is, do you mind sharing a little bit what made that transition from pastoring or teaching to pastoring to now chaplaincy?
Sure. Like you, I was once a younger person and maybe also lost or confused, not knowing this great theological question, the answer to who am I?
Mhm.
I took ministry because my mom wanted me to be a pastor.
Yeah.
And people were saying, "Oh, you're such a nice kid. You're very obedient. You're very polite. You would be a great pastor." So for someone whose identity is not well established yet, you
Mhm.
like that image.
Yeah.
So you would pursue that, not because sometimes you confuse it with calling,
Hmm.
but actually you just want to be accepted, you want to be loved, you want to be embraced. So I did that until I questioned that and said, what if this is just my mom's desire and not my desire?
Hmm.
Maybe not God's desire. So I tried several things. I went to different form of ministry, or maybe some people won't consider it ministry. I work in a government facility
Okay.
as a research assistant. I tried to leave ministry for a while, It didn't last long because I realized that my community is, is my own niche, my own group. It's not because I'm actually called to be in that position. At that point, I was never exposed to deal or to live with people outside my comfort zone.
Right.
All of a sudden, I live and work with people outside my comfort zone. I said, this is not my world.
Hmm.
So I went back to ministry. It's still not quite sure if that's really my calling.
Yeah.
We came to the United States. The available position when we got here, of course, is there was a Bible teacher and at high school uh, in New Jersey. So I applied and took that position, and lo and behold, I was doing the job because I have to. I have a family. It's not
Right.
actually my. I don't believe it's my calling. So I've been wondering, what is my calling? When I finally got into chaplaincy training,
Mm-hmm.
then I realized, the first thing that opened my mind is that my calling is to be me.
Hmm.
God wanted me to be me,
Yeah.
not to be someone else. And
Right.
sometimes that someone else is, um, you know, masked in the face of
Mm-hmm.
a pastor, even a chaplain, an administrator, leader, teacher. Then I realize, but who am I? What does God want me to be?
Yeah.
Just watching the trees and the flowers, for example,
Mm-hmm.
they are fulfilling their calling, which is to be tree, to be
Mm-hmm.
a flower.
Mm-hmm.
And for me to be someone else is, I think, it's a great dishonor to what God has designed
Hmm.
of me. So when I realized that, by the way, that is very important in chaplaincy, because in chaplaincy, the first thing that you'd like to offer is this gift of being.
Right.
And being, when you are there with someone who is in crisis, they don't see you as the role, they see you as the person.
Interesting.
So if you're hiding behind the role, they would respect the role, but still feel alone and isolated because the person is not connecting.
Hmm.
So when I realized, okay, so that's me. That's the calling that I need to pursue. To find out me,
Right.
being. Who am I?
Wow. Wow. And how long did it kind of take you to come to that process of, figuring that out? Because I feel like I'm kind of just starting to dive into that journey, myself.
Sure. The reason why we migrated to this country, because what I was accepted to be one of the CPE residents back then, clinical
Yeah.
pastoral education or chaplaincy training resident. But I took that opportunity to try a new environment, to be
Hmm.
here in this country. So when I was in that process, I was still wanting to be me. No, to be someone else. I mean,
Right.
okay, to be successful, the American dream kind of
Right.
thing. So that the first year didn't work for me. I quit actually in that process.
Okay.
But after my work as a Bible teacher in a high school setting, high school is not actually. I admire you. I said I was not trained actually to do classroom management, and I have
Hmm.
inner cities kids who are actually in need of care, and sometimes I feel like I have to babysit them, and I'm not actually geared,
Right.
to do that. So I went back to chaplaincy training.
Hmm.
This time to find myself. So it's not that easy. It's there's no quick way to finding who you are,
Yeah.
until one day I was being trained by a Catholic nun.
Wow.
I said, okay, I'm coming from a very conservative background as a Seventh Day
I was Seventh Day
Adventist,
Adventist.
and we have these assumptions and biases against Catholic.
Yeah.
You know, and I have my own struggle with my own denomination leadership and the politics involved and things like that.
Yeah.
So I could be vulnerable, and this person could easily, take me under her wings and direct me to a certain place where, if you are not if you are paranoid, you will not trust her and say, okay, this might be another way of her influencing me.
Mm-hmm.
But all of those are just my fears.
Yeah.
When we were having those sessions and training with her, I never found someone who could hold the space for me to address my own fears, my own issues with my own self, my own denominations, with my own family, without actually changing me, just allowing the process to work
Mm-hmm.
for me and with me. I experienced transformation having someone coming from a very different background who knows
Right.
how to actually hold the space for me.
Yeah.
And for me, I said, you know what? If she can do this for me, I'd like to do this for others.
Wow.
That's when I fell in love, not only in chaplaincy, but in the training involved in chaplaincy,
Mm-hmm.
which is, if I'm going to summarize it, it's actually allowing people to be who they are.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. That's kind of my next question is, far as ComCare chaplaincy, what you do, can you break that down a little bit, what you do for others and what you do for your team of chaplains?
Sure. These ComCare chaplaincy came to mind when I was a director of pastoral care in Maryland. I've been training chaplains, but the hospital can only take certain number of chaplains. You know,
Okay.
unlike nurses, you always need them um, because a healthcare culture is an intervention culture.
Hmm.
A chaplaincy is not there to provide intervention. That chaplaincy is there to provide the space for healing, but not necessarily for intervention.
Right.
So after training a number of chaplains, and I see them actually going nowhere
Mm-hmm.
because again the market is they don't need chaplains. I said, okay, I need to work with them closely. So I this is the birth of community care chaplains, where we are training chaplains, and after we train them, we connect them to agencies who are not quite aware of the resources that chaplaincy can offer.
Okay.
And I've been in this, so training chaplain plus bringing these chaplains to places where they could be more useful.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. So you're training, you train the chaplains who work with the people.
Sure.
Now you mentioned preventative care versus, what you do. It's kind of in the hospital setting. I'm assuming when you're working with people in a hospital, you're beyond that scope of preventative care. You're now, is it crisis mode? You're kind of working with people in
Sure.
shock.
Sure. I would categorize this in three things. Okay. First is in chaplaincy, I coined this name. I haven't read this in another book, but the way I train my chaplains, I said, okay, there are three things that you can do here.
Yeah.
You can provide intervention just like anyone else. For
Mhm.
example, prayer is an intervention.
Okay.
Scriptures is intervention. Hope, encouragement. Okay.
Okay.
But the culture is this: you're sick, you need prayer. Let's pray.
Okay.
Now, you don't just do that. There's another category, which is the assessment.
Okay.
Of course, you want to do
Right.
assessment before you provide intervention.
Yeah.
Okay, in a healthcare setting, these are the two things that really generate revenues for in the market.
Mhm.
Okay, do we have good diagnostic tools? Do we
Okay.
have good doctors who are right
Right. Right.
on track when they do assessment? Two, after the assessment, do they have the skill set and the resource to provide intervention?
Okay.
Okay, and, the treatment and the therapy and things like that. So where do we come in? Back in the days when time is a little bit slower than what we experience right now,
Right.
nurses, they do this. They connect.
Hmm.
They spend time with the patient.
Yeah.
Back then, you can spend 10 days in a hospital.
Right.
The hospital without feeling like, okay, you're staying too long in here. We have to rush you out. They spend time with people. We no longer have that in our practice right now. That's where the chaplain comes in.
Mm-hmm.
The communion part, the connection part. Okay. So, who is there to be with the isolated individual who just received that they're going to be dying of cancer because it's already stage 4?
Right.
Nurses are so busy attending to other people. Doctors are just kind of there to break the news, and then they're very alone.
Yeah.
That's where the chaplain's going to come in. What kind of intervention are going to provide? Of course,
Yeah.
a chaplain who's not quite clinically trained they would use their tools. Okay, scriptures, prayer,
Right.
encouragement, hope.
Right.
Those are beautiful tools. Don't get me wrong, but it won't actually make the patient less alone.
Hmm.
um, their sense of it's just like giving them pills, that would temporarily they would feel better because yeah, you're right.
Right.
Let's look at the bright side, and then you leave. Where do they live? They live actually at the bottom in the darkness, and then they're so alone. They would look for your presence again, but unlike a clinically trained chaplain who's willing to go down the basement
Mm-hmm.
and until the person who is in crisis would feel, you really get me,
Yeah.
you hear me,
Hmm.
you understand me. And in many situations and cases, chaplains only speak few words, and then they would say, thank you very much, because now I feel less alone. Even if you leave, you left a very wonderful presence and
Yeah.
companionship and energy that would say, you know what, I'm not alone here. Somebody out there understands
Wow.
how I feel. Um, that is a very hard skill set to form, because it's not just skill set;
Yeah.
it is formation.
Hmm.
You cannot quote unquote be with others if you don't know how to be with yourself.
Wow. Wow. So there's a lot of interpersonal dynamic that goes into
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
That whole aspect. It's more than just I'm putting on my hat and grabbing my tools and I'm going to work. Let's fix this person.
Sure.
It's way more it's
Hmm.
way more intense with that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what my friend shared with me a little bit. He was talking about how it took a lot of inner work on his own part with him personally as he was learning to do the chaplaincy.
Hmm.
Because my title here is a chaplain,
Hmm.
but I think I do very real chaplaincy. Most of my influence and most of my opportunity to do anything that might be, comparative to what we think is chaplaincy
Hmm.
would be in the classroom setting when I get to influence the students and maybe they hear something and maybe they're like, well, Pastor Zach, I wanted that, or Pastor Zach, I don't feel that, or Pastor Zach, I'm hurting. Then maybe I get to share a little moment with them
Hmm.
where I get to journey in that area with them. But I very rarely do I have office hours where I'm going. More of what I do was programming. So
Hmm.
this type of chaplaincy is actual.
Yeah.
You're with the person. Now,
Yeah.
one thing I'm curious to know about is, when did hospitals start seeing that as a need? Do you know, for their community?
Sure. Clinical pastoral education is actually it's the brainchild of Anton Boysen. Anton Boysen is a Presbyterian minister who has his own mental breakdown and episodes,
Okay.
and he was admitted in Massachusetts um, mental ward kind of facilities. And so, as a researcher and a thinker, he was watching the scientists,
Mhm.
the medical doctors and the behavioral science people, how do they treat, and try to help those who are like him.
Yeah.
And then he realized that, okay, you can't just do this
Hmm.
without religion. You cannot just put a wall between science and religion if you're going to deal with mental health.
Okay.
So when after his episode and his treatment in this facility, he decided to start his own program. He worked with um, Dick Richard Cabot, and which is the medical field. So they combined their expertise together and formulated this curriculum that would train clergy
Okay.
to provide care to people who are. They started in the mental health setting,
Okay.
and that evolved into a hospital,
Mm.
care chaplaincy. Now, don't get me wrong; that there had been hospital chaplains even
Before
before
that.
them, but the clinical aspect of it was born when Anton Boysen experienced it firsthand how to be a patient in a mental health unit.
Wow. So it's just from his own personal
Sure,
experience.
yeah.
That's powerful. One of my favorite books, one of the most formative books that I read in these past couple of years, was this book called Man's Search for Meaning by
Hmm.
Viktor
Frankl,
Frankl, I think
yeah.
you say his name is. And he was in the Holocaust and just talked about, the difference between those who survived the Holocaust and
Hmm.
those who didn't. he talked about how there were, he was Jewish, and he talked about how some of the men in the camps would just try to will their way through the process. I'm just
Hmm.
going to buckle down, and try harder to
Yeah.
get through this. And he found some of these men to be soulless beings. Like they
Hmm.
had no reason for existing other than to simply exist.
Hmm.
And he said of those men, they were dead even though they were living.
Yeah.
But then he said one day he was working on, I don't know, a ditch or a railroad where the soldier had them out there digging. And he said for a moment as they were, there was a sunrise.
Hmm.
And he said they looked out to the sunrise, and he said there was this hope that kind of rose in, not only in my hearts, but in the hearts of some of the men around us. And in that moment, we realized one thing: like they can take our freedom, they can take away our lives, but they can never take away our hope.
Hmm.
And he was like, that's irreplaceable. And so when
Hmm.
he went back then into practice,
Yeah.
because he was a psychologist, when he
Yeah.
went back into his practice, man search for meaning. What he discovered, especially in the field of psychology, is that men and women weren't. It's not an automobile shop. You don't bring them in, fix them, send them
Hmm.
off.
Yeah.
You help them to discover their purpose, because the human being is so much more than just what they're doing. They need to have a purpose beyond themselves that gives them meaning. So I found that interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, Paul Pricer, also a classic writer who wrote Ministers as Diagnostician.
Okay.
One of his seven diagnoses, again, this is a clergy,
Yes.
okay, using, formulating, actually, he's also a research, he's more of a researcher than a clergy, but he is inviting clergy to actually use our own resources.
Mm-hmm.
Viktor Frankl did a good job, actually, and as an existentialist, to capture
Okay.
one of the diagnoses, which is finding meaning.
Okay.
And in his book, Paul Pricer, one of the seven diagnoses is vocation, is meaning. For example, if you go to nursing home
Mm-hmm.
and you visit an elderly who says, "Chaplain, can you pray for me?" Sure. What is your prayer? My prayer request is this: can God actually take my life right now? I know
Mm.
there's no sense of me living right now. I outlive my family members and my friends.
Yeah.
There's no meaning. Okay, so that is right in front of you, um, a, 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 a life experience that is. If you are a pastoral diagnostician, you can see right there that the issue actually there's no more meaning in life.
Hmm.
How would you actually, number one, okay, the assessment and the intervention is there, as if you're going to put your hat as a healthcare
Yeah.
practitioner, but um, the contribution that chaplain could provide as well, again, go back to the communion and the connection,
Hmm.
because even them, that's a very isolating experience.
Yeah.
It, number one, there's no more community. I outlive my friends and my family members, so feeling alone. And then I no longer see the use. There's no more meaning, the use for
Hmm.
life. So if you can connect and say, you know what, take me to your world. What is
Yeah.
it like?
Hmm.
And then there is this sharing of narrative and story. At the end of the sharing of that story, lo and behold, yes, there are no more family members, no more friends who are very much willing to spend time with him, except there's one here sitting right next to her,
Yeah.
spending time, quality time. And
Wow.
that is communion.
Wow.
That alone is intervention.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, it just it made so much sense. That whole idea that it just proves that we are more than just a physical body, and just mental
Hmm.
thoughts to be fixed. If I think the right way, if I just fixed my thinking, there are times where people are like, perspective is everything, which I think is true. They're like, just think positively. And I'm like, man, but even, there were times where Job wanted to, wrestle with
Yeah.
God. There are times where David, the psalmist, was able to, share his heart. Like, I mean, is there a time, do I need to force myself to be positive in every situation? Or what does it mean sometimes in the moment to allow myself to just,
Yeah.
be
Hmm.
a little bit? So Victor kind of, put that all into
Sure.
perspective
Yeah.
a little bit for me. That's huge. Now, something you said, and we don't have to go too far into this, but you talked about how he was an Viktor Frankl. He was an existentialist. What do you mean by that exactly? In the sense of,
Sure. It's actually looking for the reason of our existence.
Mhm.
We can't just simply exist without reason.
Yeah.
without purpose. And just like what I've said, Paul Pricer used the word vocation.
Yeah.
Vocation is very different from profession.
Okay.
Okay, and you can be professional that could really earn tons of money to support your family, but still depressed and no direction and no sense of meaning.
Yeah.
And those who found their vocation, sometimes they see if they are getting paid doing their vocation, that's a big plus. That's a big blessing
Yeah.
because vocation gives them joy and meaning. This is my purpose. This is why God has created me. Kind of thing. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I feel like that takes some time to kind of, figure that out a little bit. So one question I do have is why is self-awareness so important to the human experience? Why why do we have to have meaning? Why do we have why is it so important to the human experience, and what impact does it have on our overall well-being, at least that you've seen and learned?
The first people who actually spent time and maybe they owned, this kind of experience are the people of science, Freud, for example, examining oneself.
Mhm.
But self-awareness is actually a spiritual experience,
Yeah.
It is not just a psychological exercise
Okay.
because when we were born,
Mhm.
um, from Christian theology and perspective, we're born of Adam and Eve. Therefore, whatever we saw from their kind of inner conflict, when they
Right.
realize that they are naked
Yeah.
and then they would like to clothe themselves with fig leaves,
Right.
they want to be someone else
Mhm.
because realizing who they are is are individuals who can't be embraced and can't be loved and can't be accepted because yes, they messed up. Now that is the kind of experience that we um, somewhat live into coming into this world. We would like to cover everything that is shameful, especially
Yeah.
if you're coming from a shame-based kind of environment.
Mhm.
So the goal actually of education, the goal of church, the goal of family, sometimes these three very important institution, it is actually in these institutions where you experience that pressure. If you
Okay.
want to be loved, you have to be somebody else. You know,
Hmm.
if you don't, if you don't reach, if you don't have A grades, for example,
Yeah.
you're not as popular as the rest.
Mhm.
In the family, if you don't actually if you don't have the virtues that would make a parent actually smile
Right.
and love, then maybe you are loved less than
Mhm.
those who have demonstrated that.
Yeah.
So family, school, and even in church, church sometimes is a pseudo community because
Okay.
unless you are demonstrating meeting the standards, then
Right.
you will not be embraced. But that is our nature. We create our own culture where we keep on masking and covering ourselves like Adam and Eve,
Right.
thinking that that's the way how to live, and how to be loved, and how to be successful, and how to be embraced. But spiritual self-awareness is a spiritual exercise because it's the process of understanding our own spiritual poverty. Blessed
Hmm.
are the
Poor
poor
in
in
spirit.
spirit, for there is the kingdom of heaven. It is that kind of experience that is awareness. That's
Yeah.
self-awareness, knowing who we are in God, not necessarily in what we could achieve.
Wow. That's powerful. Yeah, that's huge
Yeah.
because even when I think of the Garden of Eden experience, one of the things I like to, pull out for my students is notice how Jesus approaches Adam and Eve. He asks them, "Where are you?" And if God is all omniscient and all knowing, why would he ask that question?
Hmm.
If he already knows where they are, why is he asking the question of "Where are you?" It's almost allowing them to come to their own realization of where they're at. And he said, "Well, who told you that? Who told you you were naked? And why are you hiding from me?" It's them coming through the process of,
Hmm.
what is happening. So
Sure.
almost no judgment. It's almost like they assumed what God would do for them. So they went ahead and did the thing and hid.
Hmm.
But it's so interesting. You talked about pseudo communities a little bit, how we call them tribes. I know other people put them as tribes. We exist in these tribes, we exist in these communities, and within each of these social constructs, we create these ideas of what deems success. And I feel like sometimes that can be a good thing because it gives us something to reach for, to kind of, test ourselves against. But at the same time, it seems like it can also be a bad thing in the sense that it could mask what's really underneath and maybe what we do need to actually be working on.
Sure.
And I think what we've seen in education, I think even where education's going in a big part is, does an A grade really reflect who, the student is as a person? What does them getting an A or an F tell us, about this assignment? And so it's just really interesting across the board. We see that a human being is so much more complex than just, accomplishing something.
Sure. Sure. Scott Peck in his book, Different Drum, um, I think he tried to explain, how to actually experience a real community. And it starts with pseudo community, and then
Hmm.
there would be chaos and then emptiness before we actually fully experience a genuine community.
Wow.
And in his example of pseudo community, he didn't go far. He said, just go to a church, you know. And unless the church experience certain chaos,
Mm,
for example, um, a wife of the spiritual leader, the elder, or
mm.
um, fall into a very difficult situation, a sin that they would, that hurt the whole community,
Right.
or a pregnant a child,
Hmm.
it's something that's shameful, something that would shake, for example, the church, and then chaos happens.
Yeah.
It's only through going through that, feeling emptiness, before we could finally actually embrace one another, maybe.
Right.
um, Different kinds of chaos and earthquakes in our lives
Hmm.
before we can finally measure our ability to connect with one another. But sometimes we always strive for something that would make us feel comfortable, and ending up in a pseudo community. It looks
Hmm.
great, but within, it's very empty.
It's very
Yeah.
empty. Wow. So I find that interesting because even going back to the whole blessed are the poor in spirit, it's like all throughout scripture, God is trying to get us to kind of come to that place of where we're more self aware about who we are, where we're trying to do the exact opposite. We're trying to make ourselves believe that maybe we're not as, empty as we are. So what is a big challenge for the person who is not self-aware? What is the big challenge for the person who is unaware of who they are and just kind of keeps, pushing through, hopefully to get a, I don't know, to find purpose or meaning or have a breakthrough?
Well, we don't have to go far. Maybe it's kind of far, but it's way back when Jesus was actually in this world, and a rich young ruler came to him and said, "You know what?
Hmm.
I want to be in heaven. I want to have eternal life. What should I do?"
Yeah.
And then Jesus started with what he knows,
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, Jesus is not against you keeping the law. So he started there and said, "Yes, I've been keeping the law since I was a child."
Right.
Okay, so if keeping the law, didn't open your eyes, maybe something else is blinding you. So this is when Jesus actually introduced this concept.
Okay.
Okay, so um, here's what you're gonna do: sell everything you have and follow me. Now that is actually a principle of unmasking, a principle of being naked again,
Okay.
um, so that he would actually fully experience the communion with Christ. I mean, Christ, in the first place, I mean, he was considered homeless as well back in these days, So he has this idea what it meant to follow him,
Right.
and what it meant to really leave all the riches that he has. Um, and I think that was in the scriptures to highlight how difficult it is. Maybe it's not an overnight kind of
Right.
process, The challenge is too heavy.
Mm.
Um, but that is, your question is, what happens when a person actually is not aware?
Yeah.
We are not aware if we are blinded with the good things.
Hmm.
Keeping the law, for example, is a good thing. Thomas Merton says the worst addiction ever out there is actually our addiction to our virtues.
Hmm.
And that is what a blinded, a human being would look like.
Wow.
That they are so attracted to their own virtues that they no longer sense their own need. That's also a
Wow.
picture of lack of self-awareness.
Wow. So, in the sense, the virtues that he held, these ideas that he held that should get him to the place where he actually wanted to be. Because, to nerd out on that passage a little bit, his question of what must I do to inherit eternal life? I think it was Rob Bell who says that word, eternal life in the Greek is this idea of not only a life to come, but also life now. It's aeon, which means of this age. He's looking the masked question, the real question that he's asking is not what can I do to get into heaven? What can I do to start experiencing heaven right now? And so so this idea of virtues, it's just these ideas that we hold in our head that we think we need to stay
Mhm.
true to. But in the process of staying true to those things, we're kind of at the same time masking our true depravity, our true
Sure,
struggles.
there's nothing wrong with these virtues. I hope
Right.
we could demonstrate this virtue. But what's tempting is when we use our attachment to these virtues to measure, where we are and where are
Hmm.
others, and sometimes it empowers us to be the person of authority to actually transform others,
Wow.
teach others, because the way we measure um, our distances is based on the virtues that we have
Wow.
embraced.
Wow. I think I heard someone say once, it was a speaker, a colleague of mine when we were going through school for my undergrad. He talked about there's this place that we can come to where our head knowledge is, up here, but our heart knowledge is down here and in between. It's almost like we know what we ought to do, but we can't get to it, and so there's this disconnection. And it's almost like like, once again, not that those virtues are bad or not, whatever it is, not that that thing is bad, it's just we're not being honest with where we're at, and going into that space. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is this often, why is self-awareness, why is this area of our life so often overlooked? I don't think, I mean,
Mm.
I think people have, so much going on. I even think of students and I'm like, man, wh- how can you not be self-aware that you're all you have to do is just turn this assignment in and you get a D in my class and you'll pass? Like,
Mhm.
what is it? How do you not? So why is it? I'm sure there's so many factors, but I don't know if there's any common ones that people are most self-aware of themselves in their lives.
Sure, sure. Thomas Merton would call this sinful nature equivalent to the kind of lie that we have embraced
Hmm.
and the kind of mask that we actually adopted. And so, for example, the big lie that people who are actually suffering with self-esteem and self-worth issue,
Yeah.
the lie that they have embraced is that I don't worth anything.
Hmm.
So how do they actually um, uh, deal with that? One way to deal with that is to stop looking at themselves at the mirror,
Hmm.
because the only thing that they see is ugly, worthless individual.
Okay.
So they would find another set of mirror. Your eyes are a pretty good set of mirror, because
Right.
if I do something good, I can see in your eyes, smiling eyes, thankful eyes.
Right.
It gives me worth. The worth that I could see in the
Okay.
mirror, now I find it in you. What does that tell me?
Hmm.
So that's where the addiction is going to come in. I,
Okay.
I will keep on doing good work because in return I get information that says I'm valued, I'm worthy,
Right.
based on the things that I'm doing. So why is it hard for me to look in the mirror? Because it's the truth.
Hmm.
At the same time, it's the lie. The truth
Yeah.
that I have embraced, that I'm nothing. Well, it's true. The Bible says we're nothing,
Right.
but at the same time, the Bible says we are the apple of His eye.
Yeah.
You know, so so how do you reconcile that?
Hmm.
The thing is, we would like to sustain a transactional relationship because we don't know how to be embraced by grace.
Wow.
Because it's the grace that says you are the apple of my eye, regardless of your background.
Yeah.
but we only see our background, and then we try to redeem ourselves by doing something wonderful and something great, something good, the
Yeah.
virtues that we learn to embrace.
Hmm.
So the bottom line here to your question is why it is just hard
Yeah.
to look at oneself and see. This is also an example of Brene Brown in one of her books. When you are actually reviewing the wonderful evaluation of your boss, there are 40 questions and 39 are wonderful, and then there's one that says needs improvement,
And you're like,
and then you're like, man, it's as if heavens fell on you because of that one line there. That's who we are sometimes.
wow. It's like the other 39 don't matter
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, yeah.
That's powerful, which you said it. I think I love how you put it. It's simply just difficult. I think it seems like it's the human experience, this need to prove ourselves in some area of our life. Um, I don't know what it is. I mean, Cain did it. In Genesis chapter 3, sin happens, and then Genesis chapter 4, Cain wants his offering to be good enough. He wants what he made, what he did, to be good enough and to be acceptable. And because his brothers was more accepted than he was, he tied that to his value. So if I get rid of my brother, then you have to value me. It's almost like he's just trying to drive that idea home that I must be valued. I must be. It seems so tied to our human experience from a Christian perspective.
I like that. I like that example because I'm not even quite sure, if Cain's offering wasn't approved simply because he did something wrong.
Right.
But I think he did his best to get something in return.
Hmm.
And this is the theme of
Transaction.
this is the theme of what we're talking about. Because again, Cain, in his mind, okay, I'm a farmer, so I'm going to maybe do my best here to get something that would please you,
Yeah.
But for Abel, it's more of discovering where God is. When God asked Adam and Eve, "Where are you?"
Yeah.
Doing, embracing virtue
Mm-hmm.
is actually responding to that, asking ourselves the same question: But where is God?
Yeah.
Where are you? If you are in love, you say God is love. So I'm gonna love to discover who you are
Right.
and experience that joy instead of I'm gonna love so I can be loved in return.
Okay.
So I think Cain, didn't get that. This is just my chaplain's hat here.
Yeah.
Cain was actually doing something to get something in return,
Mm-hmm.
where Abel was actually doing something to discover
Yeah.
where God is.
It's so interesting. Yeah. It's this idea of transaction in the human experience. It's like the default mode. I know. Yeah, it's like just even in any relationship, will I do this? So then therefore I must get this, right?
Mhm.
It's almost
Yeah,
like we're holding even the other person to this idea that no, now you're obligated to do this for me because I've done this for you.
sure. Yeah.
It's the Pharisaical mindset. I do this for God, so therefore God must do this for us. It
Mhm.
wasn't, what I've heard growing up is, the Pharisaical virtue was actually really admirable. They were tired of the nation of Israel falling into sin, into captivity, and suffering.
Yeah.
And so for them, their families went through it, their parents went through it, their grandparents went through it, and they were finally like, guys, we need to stop going through this. Let's be the generation that ends it. So their virtues were actually very,
Mhm.
almost very admirable. But then when God came to just be with them, it was very hard for them
Mhm.
to finally just
Yeah.
be with him. And I think it's Ellen White who says, there exists within the human experience, believer
Mhm.
or unbeliever, this Pharisee,
Mhm.
this transaction. I need to prove myself in order to get what I need or what I want.
And there's something satisfying in that.
I think there is.
That's why it's quite addictive.
Yeah.
You know, um, yeah, it's hard actually to experience grace.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You would think it'd be easy. You
Hmm.
think like, oh, I
Yeah.
just got to do nothing.
Yeah.
Grace is still an active experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a process by which to go through it. Um, Now, what is the significance of self-awareness when it comes to our spirituality and our relationship with God? Because one thing that I do try to do, what I've tried to do with my students is, you know, if I were to ask them, I usually ask the question, if Jesus were to come right now, would you guys be saved? And almost everyone says no. Well, why not? Well, because of who I am. Well, who we are. Well, I do this thing and I do that thing and I watch this TV show and I probably shouldn't. And I'm like, really? Like, knowing what God has done for you, you think that thing's going to keep you from a relationship from? And so it's almost like they can't necessarily say why they wouldn't be saved, if we're going to use that word. It's just, it's almost like this feeling and this agreement that they've come to that they don't feel it. So therefore it must not be true in a way. So one of the things I try to do is, especially as I sit down with them, is help them to become more self-aware about who they are. But what is the significance of self-awareness, you would say, with our relationship with God and with our
Sure,
spiritual?
sure. It's a first step actually, and for you to fully exercise this second greatest commandment, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Hmm.
Okay. So the basis, and this is a very important equation. The balance is very important. You cannot love others um, in a very gracious and joyful way if you don't know how to love oneself. That's the basis of this relationship.
Right.
So, what is this relationship with self? Loving oneself,
Hmm.
being kind to oneself. So, when you were asking your students, actually, you were asking them a very indirect question that says, "Are you kind to yourself?
Okay.
Do you exercise grace towards self?"
Right.
They understand that God is gracious. Up here they can write wonderful sermons and paper about God's grace, but in here, you know, what's stopping them from experiencing God's grace as well is also their. There's always an opportunity to be kind to oneself because we're always mean to ourselves.
Right.
And when you ask that kind of question, is actually inviting them. That's the awareness.
Hmm.
Okay, you are not inviting them to exercise kindness. You are inviting them to understand how they are actually relating with oneself.
Okay.
So that's the first step. That's the self-awareness for them to realize that, yeah, if I'm the most critical person towards myself.
Yeah.
I'm the unkindest individual. You know, um, maybe I'm my worst enemy, kind of thing.
Right.
So um, that's the reason why many young people get into depression and sometimes even suicidal because there's lack of grace and kindness and love towards self.
Yeah.
And then when they try to make this equation quite balanced, either they love other people more than selves,
Hmm.
or you just selfishly love oneself more than others.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So it's almost you go to two extremes, either just become so self-absorbed with yourself and
yeah,
like you get rid of others,
yeah,
or opposite effect, you try to pour all your energy into getting love from others.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's definitely taken my spirituality to another level, especially
Hmm.
considering, asking myself the question, why do I do what I do? Do I love what I'm, doing as far as, my job goes? I think the question I've learned to ask myself a little bit more is, do I love who I'm becoming, and do I enjoy who I am? Right now I look at my life, I'm like, do I enjoy who I am? Do I genuinely like who I am, or do I enjoy who I'm becoming? So kind of, putting in perspective, I guess, myself a little bit. um
So what's your response to that?
I would say I'm in the process. I would say I'm in the process. I do think there came a time, I'm kind of exposing myself a little bit here, where I felt very successful in my ministry. And I felt I came to a point where I always wanted to be, and yet it wasn't enough. And I guess that's what I'm kind of learning, is that,
Hmm.
is it ever enough? I could always achieve more. It seems like the rich just keep getting richer. And is it ever enough? And I think it was Dave Chappelle. He's a comedian,
Hmm.
and he once said his dad told him, when he was in the process of becoming a celebrity, his dad told him, pick a number. And Dave Chappelle was like, what? And he's like, pick a number. And he's like, okay. And he's like, Dave, you can only make so much money and be happy. So you have to just pick a number and say, I'm going to be content when I have that number. And so just all these things, I've read so many books Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willenick. I became a big fan of David Goggins. His book Can't Hurt Me. And what I've learned about these people who say take extreme ownership for your life, ultimately, I think what they're saying is you have to take ownership for your experience. And I think for a lot of my life, kind of like you said, when I came into this church experience and my life was radically changed by God, and I started preaching, people right away identified me as pastor. And I just leaned into that identity because I was so, I don't know if I was hungry for approval or just community. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but I found something. And, through the process of time, I just kind of always assumed the virtue. This is what I'm supposed to be. This is what you're supposed to do. But there have been moments where I'm like, is my heart there with it though? And I think that's kind of the journey that I'm kind of going through right now with self-awareness. That this whole year, all I've done in my freshman Bible
Mhm.
class and senior Bible class is highlight that over and over and over again. Because I think that's key to the human experience and human development. I don't think we were made to just push through our problems, push through our experience, and hope for the best
Mhm.
one day. I think we are made to, as much as possible, um, be who God created us to be. And what does God say? Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will
Mhm.
give you rest for your souls. And I think that's really what, I'm in the process of being. So I like who I'm now becoming. I like the process of where I'm going. But I still, I feel like I'm on the right path.
Great, great. The danger in, because again, we're very good in tricking ourselves. We have, our mind is full of illusions and fantasies,
Interesting.
and sometimes we merge them with our own standards.
Uh-huh.
And then when we respond to this question, do I love, who am I becoming, uh, by whose standard?
Yeah.
And if they are actually the standard we place here, as far as our fantasy is concerned, then sometimes we feel like, yes, I do, because it meets my own fantasy. But then when the world collapses, we don't know what to do with that, because
Mhm.
the way we define ourselves is based on those standards. So we
Right.
go back to square one, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, God says in Revelation 3, I would rather have you cold or hot. It's not about how much you have acquired
Hmm.
or achieved, the kind of level.
Yeah.
What I don't want is your lack of awareness. You don't know
Yes.
that you're naked. You don't
Yes.
know that you're wretched, that you're blind.
Yes.
It's hard for God to help you
Right.
with that. The spiritual poverty is no longer working because you no longer actually
Hmm.
sense that. So spiritual poverty, if everything collapses and you're back to square one. And for those who are listening, sometimes you don't want to be in that place that you want to actually hurt yourself for always going back in the same place, square one.
Yeah.
But God is there.
Yeah.
God is there. I mean, that's the square one of Adam and Eve. God is there.
Yeah.
The question is, where are you? That kind of question is, can you embrace where you are?
Hmm.
Because that's okay. Because
Yeah.
I'll be there. Stop masking yourself.
Hmm.
Stop covering yourself with achievements and virtues and whatever that I'll be there where you are.
Yeah.
God is the first, you know, um, person who communes, who introduced this idea
Yes.
of communing.
Let's go there.
Yeah. In fact, before he provide intervention, or assess what's going on, there's already the heart that communes. The question is, where are you?
Hmm.
The question is, he didn't start, what is your weakness? He didn't start with, let me see, let's understand your tendency. That's assessment. He
Yeah.
started with, where are you? I want to be with you. Where are you? That
Hmm.
is intimate relationship there.
Yeah. Well, once again, when he called out to Adam, I think of that verse, where he says, "Come, let us reason together. Though your sins be like scarlet, they shall be white as
Yeah,
snow."
yeah.
So he's like, "Let's talk about this. Behold, Revelation. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. I just want to come in and be with you." So it's really interesting that you brought up that passage of Laodicea. He's like, "I'd rather honestly have you hot or cold. Hot or cold are not the issue. It's Luke. It's your lack of self-awareness that is
Yeah,
the issue. That's
yeah,
what's hurting you right now,
yeah,
is the fact that you're not self-aware."
yeah.
um and I think of the painful process that Peter had to go through in his own process of denying God, failing him, then he giving up on him and coming back to him. It's
Hmm.
kind of back and forth, taking him through that process. But I love that Jesus was willing to, willing to be there
Mhm.
with him. I think for me, what has become huge in my life is, I don't know if this has become a motivating factor or not, is just the loneliness. You know what I mean? I don't think we were made to feel that, loneliness. And once we start getting there, to me, that's become a red flag in my life. Okay, what am I doing? Who am I separating myself from? What am I masking? What's happening? Because I
Mhm.
am feeling right now
Mhm.
exhausted, tired, and lonely. So
Mhm.
I feel like that's been a huge development for me,
Sure.
um, in my experience. Now,
Mhm.
before we walk away from this, what are some tools? What are some things that we can use in our life to help us to begin this practice of self awareness, or to begin at least the journey of starting to become more self-aware for who we are? Maybe there's a listener out there who doesn't like who they are. Maybe there's someone out there who's been on this journey for a while and they're still trying to discover, who they are, what they're doing. But what are some tools to help us in this process of, becoming more self-aware about who we are?
Sure. Um, the best tool that we do have actually is ourself. This is kind of there's an irony in there because we also feel that self gets in the way in terms of relating with God,
Right.
but at the same time, self is a good tool in getting connecting with God. And here's why. Um, some people never thought about this relationship with oneself.
Hmm.
They're very good in nurturing relationship with others,
Right.
and sometimes the idea of nurturing relationship with oneself is attached to being selfish
Yeah.
or narcissistic
Yeah.
kind of thing. The truth is, God has given us emotions, for example,
Hmm.
um, very common in different kinds of faith group would say that God doesn't want you to be sad, God doesn't want you to grieve,
Okay.
because the emotions is. But these are part of the tools that God has given us,
Yeah.
you know, as human beings, because they bring certain messages. If we don't listen to the message of our emotions in the here and now,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to distort the message, and we become myopic in the way we see them.
Okay.
For example, um, if there is injustice at the moment and I feel anger,
Right.
and I listen to that anger and say, okay, something is not right that's going on in here. If I bury that under the rug,
Mm-hmm.
and then the next time it comes, it becomes stronger. Sometimes it becomes rage. I
Hmm.
no longer see the message. I only experience the feeling. And the more I suppress it, the more it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Now I can be violent. I can be hurting myself and others
Yeah.
because I stopped listening to it. But it has a message that it tells me,
Hmm.
you know. So if we don't listen to what our heart emotionally is saying, if we don't actually value
Mm-hmm.
our own emotions, um, that also means we don't value ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, so that's a very good way to start. If you want to use some tools in here, is to listen to what your emotions are telling you.
Yeah.
Some people don't listen to them because they could be deceiving.
Yes, that's what we're told. The heart
Yeah,
is
sure,
deceitful and
sure,
wicked.
sure. But they convey messages.
Hmm.
It's up to us how to actually read the message that our emotions is actually telling us.
Yeah.
Because it is, we don't actually suppress emotions when we are in love. And, the emotions tell us, okay, write this poem or bring this flower,
Right.
But even that would get affected if we shut down other emotions. Even the emotions that we love to demonstrate and express, they
Hmm.
would also get affected. You see, some people are very, very much in love and they look so stoic, you know. But at the same time, when there's a great earthquake, they look so calm. So they did a good job in maybe avoiding other
Interesting.
some of the tools that they do have. But our body doesn't is not selective. Our
Hmm.
body works as a whole organism. It affects
Interesting.
everything. So
Wow.
that's one of the tools. But yeah.
That's a good one. Well, Geof, thank you. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate your wisdom. It means
Sure.
a lot to me. Hopefully, we can stay connected as you guys make the
Yeah.
move to the great California.
Yeah, yeah. Zoom is welcome to our world right now. Hybrid kind of thing. Yeah, we can do Zoom in this.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, thank you guys so much for listening. If you're curious more to dive into this idea of self-awareness, I would say, also a great place to start is yeah, just start asking these questions. Start thinking about your feelings and what you're going through. There's books out there, there's resources out there. The Bible's there. But even for me, my relationship with God has definitely taken it's taken a whole different experience trying to see it through the lens of self-awareness, more of who am I becoming with God versus what does God just want me to do, and am I doing that? Cool, let's move on from here. So I think this is key. So thank you, Geof. Thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, very much welcome. It's my pleasure.
All right, we'll see you guys later.